Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another incredible episode with Robert B. Davis II. We are going through The Art of War, and this is our third episode. Kind of going a little loosely, not necessarily attacking it from an approach of chapter by chapter, but mainly unfolding it through a series of topics that Rob has been gracious enough to provide for us. You can find Rob's work on his Substack, which is in the link in the description below, as well as a link to his YouTube website, his YouTube subscription, and as well as the Sons of God Discord community. There will be a link in the description down below for that as well. If you're looking for some accountability to help you on your path to becoming a more well-rounded and effective masculine man. So, Rob, how are you doing today?
Good. How you doing?
Doing well, doing well. Thank you. What are we talking about today?
So today we're going to talk about the idea of the Tao as it's used in this text. There are different uses for it, but the idea of the Tao, or sort of the cohesion of the state, the way that people mesh well together, the way that a culture functions. You could say in a bunch of different ways, the life force, the spirit of a nation, that sort of thing. But to open it up, we're going to talk about a piece of the Art of War. That's one of those bits of sort of counterintuitive wisdom and advice that might be a little bit confusing, but it'll set us up for this talk and the tone that we're trying to take. So in chapter 7, it just says briefly, if you besiege an army, you must leave an outlet. Well, that's kind of weird. It's like, okay, is there some chivalry thing going here where you can't totally surround someone? You don't want to be completely like vicious in your siege or something, but that doesn't fit with other stuff because we talked about how he wants that sort of overwhelming force to complete defeat. So what's going on there? Well, if you go into a little bit of the text that built on this tradition, it explains it more. And some texts that were found, they're older, not actually part of the Art of War itself, but from that tradition and commenting on it. It says, open a road for the enemy to depart, show them a path for flight. When they are seeking life and escaping from death, they certainly won't have any will to fight. Then we can strike them. Even if they are numerous, they will certainly be destroyed. So, what this little point is of if you besiege an army, leave an outlet, what it's actually doing is putting in a psychological um, tactic, a weapon of if they perceive a way of escape, if they see they're in trouble and they can see a way to escape, then they're going to be focused at least partly on escaping. And that's going to throw off their Tao, let's say. That's a place where they would use the term Tao, their spirit, right? Um, and then on the counter side to this, when he talks about the different terrains, he talks about fatal terrain. And fatal terrain is a place where you're surrounded, where you're screwed, you're going down. And he says, what I would do when we're on fatal terrain, you tell the men or you show the men and make them see that we will not live. And so the point there is, well, if we're really screwed, if we're on fatal terrain, like we're going down, at least if we can get everybody to realize that and to be conscious of it, then everybody gives it all. You know, everybody fights to the last, to the death, and maybe you get a turn of events because of the force of your fight. There's another place where he says the whole art of warfare is the art of turning victory into defeat or defeat into victory, to be able to grasp victory out of the arms of defeat, um, to change defeat into victory. So this is one of the ways he recommends doing it. If you're in this place where it's all bad for you, don't let people don't let people despair. One of the things he says is ban omens. You know, don't have them say, "Oh, we got a bad omen. That means we're going down." He's like, "Nope. Have them see the reality and have them fight according to the reality. Like we're going down, the only hope we have is to all give our best. And so that is kind of the setup for what we're going to talk about here, because we're going to talk about the Tao of a nation. We're going to talk about the spirit of a nation, the spirit of a culture, and how people cohere together, how people have effective relationships, effective economies, that sort of stuff. What is said about that in the art of war. And according to the assessment in the art of war, I think we're going to see that we are metaphorically on fatal terrain in terms of our culture, our society, the things that we're seeing, the ways that we're headed, and stuff like that. So we're going to take a look at the assessments that are put forth in the art of war. Like it's not us saying, oh, let's look at these things that we think show doom and gloom. It's like he's giving us assessments saying these are the things you need to look at for a good state. Obviously, the opposite is bad, and here's how you do the assessments. So we're going to look at some of those assessments, look at the state of our culture and society, and unfortunately, we're going to be trying to show that we're on fatal terrain, that we're not going to get through this unless, hope beyond hope. We pull it together and enliven a Tao out of the fear of death, something like that.
That's an incredible point that Sun Tzu puts in here, because ultimately you get the fire out of somebody when they're backed into a corner, right? And so, like you're saying, if you allow that sense of retreat, it's almost a comfort to the enemy to know that there's an outlet, right? So if they're always looking
Mhm.
behind their shoulder and knowing that they can just scutter out whenever they feel okay to do so, then they don't have to put as much effort. And so that reminds me of something that Tony Robbins said. His mentality whenever he approaches something is to burn the boats,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
So burn them behind you, and that way there's nothing. The only thing you can do is put in 100%. And
Hmm.
we've all experienced this in some aspect of our lives when we felt like we've been backed into a corner and we pulled something out of our rear end that we had no idea that we were capable of doing. It's like a mother that that pulls a car up from her motherly instincts to let her child come out. It's like, well, where did that strength come from? It's where did that resilience come from? That's it's almost it's beyond human, right? A lot of the cases. And so if you
Hmm.
can prevent your enemy from experiencing that feeling that they're backed into a corner, then they're less likely to exert the amount of energy necessary to overcome you, right?
Right.
Because and I've looked at that too, even in regards to let's say addiction in a case, right? Where a lot of times it takes for us to get into a feeling of incomprehensible demoralization, just that complete bottom, almost a feeling of death, like there's literally nothing else. We're hanging on by the skin of our teeth. That tension, that draw, like an arrow, like the bow being pulled back. Sometimes it just takes that last click, and that is being backed into a corner. Many of us never experience that. I'll end this mental thread here with this statement, in that it's easier for people to get off of drugs, like let's say heroin and alcohol, in the sense that the repercussions from these
Mm-hmm.
drugs are quite quick. So you
Right.
know quite quickly that you're backed into a corner, right? Like your face starts to peel off, or you shake, or whatever crazy byproduct is of you consuming that. But let's say something like smoking, the signs don't show up. And so by
Hmm.
the time you know you're cooked,
Right.
it's too late, because so there isn't necessarily the feeling of being backed into a corner with that specific substance. And
Right.
so many times it's to our benefit. The quicker we get backed into a corner in certain situations, the better it is, because we inherently know within us that we are capable of overcoming something when we're backed into a corner. Many of us
Hmm.
just don't realize that we're in those situations because we're not
Right.
enough to be backed into a corner. Um, and then kind of going off into the Tao aspect of this. Well, that's kind of the cohesive glue. If you don't have that level of cohesion, that societal melding, so to speak, that keeps everybody on a base level, if you don't have that structure, that foundation, um, it dissipates, and it dissipates quite quickly. And I don't think that many people have understand the necessity to really get back on the right track in this regard, because as a lot of the older generations are passing, uh, a lot of the newer generations that are coming in haven't been instilled with a lot of the character traits, or a lot of the means to really stoke the Tao. That hasn't necessarily, like a torch, it hasn't been passed down. And so it's like it's like playing a game of telephone, where it's like a living story that we have to, it's not something that just inevitably comes up. It's a flame that must be cultivated and catered. And I think that at this day and age, because of the extreme amount of convenience and short attention spans of the modern human, we're not necessarily capable of carrying the tower right now to the next generations.
Right, right. You said the towel hasn't been passed along, but to some degree we've also refused it, right?
Mm.
We've said, oh, we don't need that anymore because, the world's just different. Like people, everything's different, everything's changed. Old people didn't know what they were talking about. They were just dealing with something else. This is a new age. We're just doing something new, so we don't need all that old advice. But
All that jargon. Yeah.
right, again, but this is sort of we're going into this super old book and seeing, hey, actually, they're saying things that make sense and are directly relevant. Um, so just on that, like, for, people might remember that the setup for this book is that there's this older, evil, powerful state that is sort of crumbling and very corrupt. And there's this younger, newer, more just state that's up and coming. And the art of war is the tale of like wise advice to that newer, up and coming state on how to conquer that old evil state. And this became sort of the archetypal battle of ancient China of like there was the old Shang and the new Chao, and the Shang were evil, or sorry, the Chao were evil, and the uh, anyway, I'm not a expert on it, but I think it was the Shang that were evil and the Chao that were new and good. So they always had this tale in their minds, and I'll just read a couple things from the commentary here. The Chow's determined effort to free the realm from the yoke of suffering and establish rule of virtue and benevolence became the inspirational essence of China's moral self-perception. As dynasties decayed and rulers became morally corrupt and increasingly ineffectual, new champions of righteousness appeared who confronted the oppressive forces of government, rescued the people from imminent doom, and returned the state to benevolent policies. So there's this idea of, a well-governed state is benevolent. It's taking care of the people. And that is this aspect of maintaining the Tao. But it's when a state starts to go after its own interests and it neglect its people and things start to fragment. That's when things go bad and they're moving away from virtue. So it says here, according to Confucian thought, which became the orthodox philosophy and prescribed view in ancient China, the ruler need only cultivate virtue, accord with the seasons, and implement benevolent policies in order to be successful in attracting universal support and fostering stability. And so, a good government, by their standards, was one that avoided the pitfalls of extravagance and debauchery. So, basically, don't be corrupt and spend all your money on yourself and, wild politics parties and that sort of stuff. Flights to private islands in certain places. Instead of exploiting and exhausting the people, its kings generally fostered policies to nurture them, increase population, and stimulate productivity. And just ending these couple quick notes, some of those really just practical things that they call benevolent. One of the evils that they attributed to these evil kings, these evil rulers, were imposing heavy taxes. Like that seems really practical. That seems like something people can have the idea, oh, that's just something modern people complain about or Americans complain about. But heavy taxes has always been a detriment to society and a burden on people and has always stirred uprisings. Um, and again, here, people think about profit and capitalism and they're like, oh, again, modern West, that's just something they say, blah, blah, blah. But again, ancient China, when they were rectifying the government, one of the things they did was, in a specific scenario, it says they opened up occupations of the merchants and artisans. So they allowed merchants and artisans to do their own work for their own profit and facilitated the realization of profits from fish and salt. So before these people were not getting their own private profits, and then once the state returned to benevolent policies, they were. So there's this really, I mean, there'll be a lot in terms of internal virtue that we talk about, but the external and the societal and just the simple and practical are really kind of obvious things. And people, I think today kind of bat them off and like, oh, that's just, a capitalist talking point or a right-wing talking point. But it's like, actually, people providing for their own lives and flourishing is pretty core to the Tao, to the spirit of a nation, to a nation doing well.
That's when people feel satiated, it's almost like a level of sedation where if it's good enough, then there's no need to really cause a ruckus. Like, sure, like we got to pay our taxes, right? But I mean, like we're getting Grand Theft Auto 6 next year, and sure, like gas might be a little expensive, but I mean, we got Stranger Things season 5 coming out, so that's something to look forward to. We can get in our car and drive. We can, you know, so there's a balance, right? There's like a give and a take where I think on multiple levels we can all agree that there's a level of oppression. There's a level of slavery going on regardless of where you are in the world. I mean, just because you can't see the bars doesn't mean you're behind them. Doesn't mean they don't exist. So, you can see kind of that tug of war when a government gets too separated from the people. And whether it's through taxes or through it's primarily through taxes like we're talking about, where there's just that tension where the cost of living is too great because not only is the government taxing the people right out of the gate, but then also they're printing more money, causing inflation, meaning that things are more expensive to buy as well. So it's like you know the thread is being burnt from both ends. And if the government can maintain that balance where they're able to still like that from both ends, but not get the people upset enough to where they're pulling out the guillotines,
Right.
then things are good. And I mean, they're good for the government. They're not
Right, right. Yes,
yeah,
yes. Yeah.
not good for the people.
Right. Yeah.
And we're coming into a very interesting time where you can see now firsthand. I mean, you and I were a couple of peasants in the United States, and we can get firsthand account of what politicians are doing allegedly around the world, right? We're not having to rely on our neighbor 3 miles away on a local farm that tells us some news that happened 6 months ago. We're getting
Mhm.
instant, real time information. And it's harder then for a lot of these governments to hide that level of corruption. And either we're getting into a particular point where the the institutions that control the levers of information are going to have to really crack down a little harder to ensure that people aren't privy to a lot of the information. Like they don't want a lot of this Epstein stuff coming out, right? They don't want people to understand a lot of this stuff. So as things become as the veil is lifting and as things become a little more transparent, just as a byproduct of the information that's becoming more freely available, there's going to have to be a clamping down, because otherwise people are going to get too restless with a lot of the stuff that's going on. See, you can't even necessarily get people to buy into wars anymore, right? It doesn't necessarily, like, unless you paint like a Thanos level villain or something
Mhm.
to the American people to get them to go do something. Like, you're not gonna get anybody. Like, people are too busy watching TikToks and eating cheese puffs,
Right.
to get them to do it. And there's also a level of and I don't mean to say, like, this is kind of a weird thing to say, but I guess if there was any benefit of something like nihilism, right, it would be that people aren't even interested in war. Like, you're not even getting the average Gen Z or nihilistic millennial to get up and do anything. So I guess it's kind of some sick byproduct of it. You're not getting
Mhm.
a bunch of young people gung ho about murdering other people for governmental cause. And so I just kind of wanted to leave it with that. I wanted to get your view on that, on kind of like the orchestration that a government needs to play depending upon the era, the time, the society. Like, there's so many different variables, and
Yeah.
it's a balancing act to where they appear benevolent, they appear like Santa Claus, and the last thing they want to do is to get people to realize that Santa Claus doesn't exist, that actually the people in charge are quite malevolent.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So at the beginning, you were talking about that satiation, and I was kind of talking about the positive side of satiation in terms of fulfillment. But you're talking about like a short-term satiation where behind the screens, there's this greater order of um, usury going on.
Mm.
Like you get the Grand Theft Auto, you get the movies, whatever it is, and that allows you in the moment to overlook the big things going on. Whereas the ideal balance between the government and the people would be where that satiation is not just momentary, but is actually fulfilling and sustainable going on into the future.
Yes.
Not just distracting you from the moment when you know there's this big flashy thing that you got to deal with. And you're right about the different ages and different time periods. I was just reading and while you're talking, thinking about in Aristotle, he talks about how tyrannies were more prevalent in rural
Mm.
areas in his time, rural kingdoms, than in cities. Now, that might some people might think that sounds a little odd because, well, today it seems like cities are more on board with more draconian measures, and rural people are more like, no, leave us alone. But it makes sense from that idea of information of back before we had the media, before we had developed ideas of individual sovereignty and whatnot. When you just had a ruler in charge of people, okay, if they're all a bunch clumped together, and they can communicate quickly, that does provide more of a buffer against their power versus when everybody's spread out. And like you said, they're getting their news much later, infrequently. Then it's going to be a lot easier to control them all because they can't really get together as easy. So that's something that's changed over the ages. Um, but in terms of the other side of that, like a good government. This is the philosophy that's coming out of Confucianism and ancient China. It says, on the whole, states that were well governed by reasonably compassionate, dynamic rulers enjoyed much greater support and even enthusiastic commitment from both the populace and the officials. Their people went forth into battle ungrudgingly, that's something you were talking about, with determination and intensity, unified and disciplined in defense of their interests. In contrast, under corrupt and extravagant rulers, the people began military campaigns already wearied and exhausted, and could only grow more dispirited and filled with rancor, even if initially motivated by national antagonisms to fight the enemy. So that's the thing. We can paint as big a monster as we want, but I mean, the Art of War says over and over, prolonged warfare is not a good thing. It does not help the state. It innervates society. You need to avoid it. You need to let the people recoup. You need to make sure that you're not taxing them and draining them too much. And that's just the basic overview. If you're doing well, legitimately doing well by the people, they'll notice and they'll be happier and they'll trust you and they'll be usable in a battle when you need it. But when you're just going to go to battle and you're not, it doesn't seem to impact or care for the people, then yeah, people will get nihilistic, as you said, and then even the carrots don't work anymore because you know. So another thing it says here, uh, following on that, the focus of all grand strategy must be the development of a prosperous, contented populace whose willing allegiance to their ruler is unquestioned. So again, if even if you want to be like the super tyrant kind of guy of like I'm in control and I get to do the things and I get to go to war, okay, but the best way to do that is to have your populace be contented and prosperous so that they can provide for that and so that they like you and listen to you. And again, that's something Aristotle says. He's like, one of the best ways to continue being a tyrant is to not be so much of a tyrant. Like, don't be just ridiculous about it. Try to be at least appear kind of like a good king and take care of the people a little bit, and then you'll last longer. And this brings up what they call in again Chinese philosophy the essential problem of command, forging a clearly defined organization in control of thoroughly disciplined, well-ordered troops. The critical element is spirit, technically known as qi, the essential vital energy of life. So again, the focus is we want to be able to do battle. So therefore, we need people who are rested and prosperous and able to give that. And we need to be able to discipline them and order them without them feeling like, oh, this is too much and rebel. And they need to have this vital spirit. And all of that together, achieving that is contained within maintaining the Tao of the state. And again, that goes back to that first one I read, where the states are well governed, reasonably compassionate, and uh, making the people prosperous and contented, right? That's sort of the Tao in essence. So with that all being said, it says here in the history that does not mean that ancient China followed those rules more than anyone else. This is something that people have theoretically recognized for thousands of years, but in terms of practice, uh, mostly we've had bad kings. Remember tyrants a lot in the West, and same thing in China. They did not regularly have super virtuous kings, even though they had this philosophy that said, "Hey guys, this is the best way to do it." So, not trying to paint a rosy picture of history, but the wisdom, the ideas are there, and those are solid.
It's an interesting that's interesting because what comes to mind is the level, the styling of government to where the people are actually being heard and the government is actually acting out the desires of the people and actually fulfilling that. And there's always been a struggle, like we just said that there's more evidence of bad rulership. There's more evidence of even though and I laugh because ultimately that's the goal, that's the desire of people at any given point, is to have a proper level of representation. There's an understanding that there needs to be a level of hierarchical structure uh, to some degree in order for society to function. But then there's always that tug of war of who's actually in charge. Is it the placeholder of the people that the people put in charge, or is it the actual people? And if the government can sedate the people enough, or if the government can convince the people that they're not actually in control, and get them to a point of convenience, then they're just easily manipulatable. They're more easily controlled, manipulated. And so what comes to mind is I believe you pointed out that a good ruler is not questioned, I believe. And to
Yeah.
me, like of course you want a ruler that makes incredible decisions and acts. Of course, we're all fallible, right? But
Mhm.
to assume that any leader should not be questioned is will lead to tyranny, right? It will lead
Yeah.
ultimately. And that what comes to mind is I'm reading the second volume of a Revolutionary War trilogy right now. It's forget the author's name. I'll have to pull it up here. Um, but in the book, they were talking about England being heavily taxed and the
Mhm.
population. A lot of the discussion in Parliament was, do we continue to fund this war in the United States while we're in poverty ourselves, just because King George wants, the pride of being able to subjugate the 13 colonies. Ultimately, it was King George's war, and then the people had to suffer for that. So even then, there was a lot of that issue. And on the American side, a lot of the generals that were coming in from France to help train the army didn't understand why the Continentals were not just obeying orders. And
Mhm.
I think that this is one of the real gems of at least the founding of the United States. It's gotten us into a lot of trouble, but at least initially this was great. Was there was always an asking of, well, why am I doing this? Like, you're telling me that I have to do this, but I need to know why. I need a buy-in. And that I think is incredibly pivotal in getting a free society, or at least a moderately free society, to follow through with whatever it is that you're doing. You need that buy-in. So if you wanted to invade, if you wanted to get involved in World War II, you needed a Pearl Harbor. You needed something to get the American people to go from maybe a level of isolationism, maybe even dabbled with a little bit of nihilism, getting into a war, buying into that, getting going. Um, we've seen that throughout history, and I mean that's essentially any cause for a false flag, right? Is some level of manipulation that wouldn't be there on its own to get people to buy into something, and I think that that's really important as we continue to grow. Like, there's a lot of gridlock there in terms of asking, why should we be doing things, why? But I mean, that's ultimately, that is what brings forth the truth, because then you can make an unbiased decision on whether or not this is a correct decision. Okay, well, you're telling me to do this because you're an expert, but I need to know why you're telling me to do this. Why should I do it? And then I'll make the decision. And so I think that even that asking of why, and the people having the ability to ask why, is somewhat of a firewall between total tyranny, and then just, at the same time, complete unfoldment because there's no order, and it's just people doing whatever they want to do.
Right. Yeah, that's definitely a part where you can tell that this is not an American text. This is an ancient text. Um, and you might say that for America, like for maintaining the Tao of America, we've added the element of transparency, right, to government, transparency and representation. So this is a text we might look at it as sort of cynical of like, okay, the ruler wants unquestioned control, so he doesn't have to deal with the people's questions. But even from that point of view, like even if you wanted to address leaders of America today, you say, okay, you guys just want to not be questioned. You want your media to say what you want and people just to go along with it. Okay, the best way to do that is to be honest. Like that's how you get trust is to be honest. And so even if you want to have like some lies, the best way to be corrupt and have lies is to be mostly honest and just like a little bit corrupt, you know? And that's cynical, but I'd rather have that than just this nonsense position of like, oh, we can just lie all the time and be super corrupt and then just be like, no conspiracy theorist.
Right.
Like this can't go on, right? This game can't continue. Um, at least if there's just the once in a while abuse of trust and the rulers get what they want, but if we have a rich, prosperous society and it's mostly trustworthy, I mean, might be all you can really ask for. But anyhow, so starting to look at our society, it says here in chapter 3 of The Art of War, the highest realization of warfare is to attack the enemy's plans. Next is to attack their alliances. And it ends at the bottom with actual conflict. And one thing it also points out is that conflict between armies is advantageous. Combat between masses is dangerous. So again, there's this recognition of you do not want like civil war. You don't want masses of conflict. You want isolated, strategic execution by trained armies, between trained armies, hopefully. Um, that's where you're getting your advantage. But the highest realization is to attack the enemy's plans, to destroy their ability to fight before they can even fight. And I think maybe that's what was intended here, but I think we're seeing now that the highest realization of warfare is to attack the enemy's Tau, and that our Tau is under attack, or at least just deteriorating. In chapter 3 of The Art of War, it says, one whose upper and lower ranks have the same desires will be victorious. And in contrast to that, it says, in chapter 11, in antiquity, those who excelled in the employment of the army were able to keep the enemy's forward and rear forces from connecting, the many and the few from relying on each other, the noble and the lowly from coming to each other's rescue, the upper and lower ranks from trusting each other. So if you've got your Tau, your upper and lower ranks are cohesive. If your Tau is broken, the noble and the lowly, the upper and the lower, the few, the many are disconnected. So just based on that assessment, how's our Tau doing in America or in the West?
Probably on a pretty steep decline there, I'd say so myself.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of division, a lot of uh, lack of, again, they will have the same desires. Do we feel like we all have the same desires? Even if we say, well, um, we want America to flourish. We want America to be America, but we can't agree on what America is anymore. When it began, what defines it? So again, this is part of that disunity. So based on that assessment, we're not doing so hot. And then I thought I'd pull in a couple things here from slightly different material. This is from the Six Secret Teachings, which is one of the um, ancient Chinese military texts. This is the one that you would basically be executed for if you were found to own it. But it says here, as an advice to the ruler in terms of keeping the Tao, keeping the advantage in battle, the ruler must not loan the three treasures to other men. If he loans them to other men, the ruler will lose his awesomeness. Kind of a funny use of the term, but lose his power, right? Lose the Tao. So what are these three treasures, we might ask? Well, these three treasures are agriculture, industry, and commerce. Don't loan those to other men. Don't outsource agriculture, industry, and commerce. It says don't
Wow.
do that. How are we doing on that?
We're doing that.
We're
We're
doing that.
doing
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Yep. It says, do not estrange your relatives. Do not neglect the masses. Um, how are we doing on that?
Hey, put your mask on 6 feet apart. Okay.
Right. Yes,
Get out of the
exactly.
house when you're 18.
Yes, exactly. Okay. So that was fun. I think this one's even more fun. This is from Aristotle's Politics. And he's talking about the methods by which tyrannies operate and preserve their power. So let's just do an assessment here. Um, their main three goals for a tyranny to maintain power is to prohibit common meals, clubs, and education, to make people adopt a defensive attitude against everything likely to produce two qualities of mutual confidence and high spirit. Um, to use every means for making every subject as much of a stranger as possible to every other.
Yeah.
And to require every resident in the city to constantly be appearing in public. Another way to say that would be surveillance opportunity being
Right.
constant. So another one would be use of secret police. Another one would be sowing mutual distrust and fostering discord between friend and friend, between people and notables, between one section of the rich and another. And finally, it benefits a tyrant to impoverish his subjects, partly to prevent them from having the means for maintaining a civic guard. That would be uh, Second Amendment stuff. Partly to keep them so busy with their daily tasks that they have no time for plotting. Um, to increase poverty of the tyrant's subjects, to curtail their leisure, the imposition of taxes produces a similar result. And here, the same vein of policy also makes tyrants warmongers, with the object of keeping their subjects constantly occupied and continually in need of a leader.
Wow.
So,
So like
did I describe some foreign state that nobody's ever heard of there?
uh absolutely. It may be something along the lines of the semi-United States of America there by chance. I mean,
Yeah.
that's incredible. Like, and this is, I mean, everybody, you know, the peasant like you and I that doesn't have knowledge of this, right? That is ignorant to this to some extent. Okay, understandable. Okay. But people that rule the world know this. They know this.
Yes.
They know exactly what they're doing. They know exactly what they're doing. And so, we've talked about this in multiple forms. Well, you keep the population distracted, bread and circus. You keep them anxious. They're just one paycheck away from being completely broke. So you have them on the hamster wheel. So they don't have time to even plot anything. There's no time. You can't go to the Green Dragon tavern in Boston now to plot your severance from the crown. You can't do that anymore because of the surveillance state, right? Because everybody's in public. And what's interesting about that as well is it's not like the 1984 version where we're looking at all. I mean, we got the 5G towers, but the Pokemon Go, like where
Mhm.
everybody has a reason to have their camera on and pointed out, or you just have it pointed towards you now. And so you're completely always on display. And so literally everything that we've been talking about has come to fruition. And it's almost like one of those like multiple choice questions, those like kind of retort, like are you really
Yeah.
asking these kinds of questions, like A, B, C, or D, all of the above, like pick your
Yeah.
poison. And
Okay.
that's literally what this is. And so, you know
We still got a few more to go.
oh, okay, we're still going. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, yeah, we're not done. We're not done
Whoops.
yet. Okay. So again, still Aristotle. Tyrants' first end and aim is to break the spirit of their subjects.
Mm.
They know that a poor-spirited man will never plot against anybody. Their second aim is to breed mutual distrust. Tyranny is never overthrown until people can begin to trust one another, and this is the reason why tyrants are always at war with the good. They feel that good men are dangerous to their authority, not only because they think it shame to be governed despotically, but also because of their loyalty to themselves and to others, and because of their refusal to betray one another or anyone else. The third and last aim of tyrants is to make their subjects incapable of action. So, again, that seems pretty familiar. But what just made me laugh when I read this the other day was advice he's giving to the tyrants. One of the things he says, just don't be a drunkard. But I mean, if you're gonna be a drunkard, at least don't let people see it. Don't just parade it around, like keep it behind doors. And then he says, the tyrant should be personally free from any suspicion of sexually abusing any of his subjects, boy or girl, and all of his association should be equally free from suspicion.
It should be equally free from, so it's okay if you do it, just make sure that it's hidden that you're doing all
Yeah,
that.
but like, how is it? Like, it seems like a crazy thing that we would have this Epstein stuff going on, but
Yeah.
it's like this is a
That's
common thing.
literally what it's talking about.
Yeah, 2000 years ago, 3000 years ago, people were like, "Oh yeah, yeah, probably shouldn't do that because people kind of do that and it um gets wrong. A tyrant should abstain from every form of arrogant behavior and from two forms above all others, the infliction of physical chastisement and of sexual abuse of the young." It's the biggest no-nos.
It just goes in tandem with being a tyrant,
Yeah.
abusing
Yeah.
children or being, a drunkard or whatever the case may be. It's like they pointed out on display, like this is typically what tyrants do. And we understand that, that being a tyrant, you're gonna want to do, this, and you're gonna want to be a drunkard. So just make sure that you keep it under the radar because the people that you're oppressing might not like that and they might stand up. They
Yep.
feel they might feel like they're pushed into a corner if they view their leader as being a drunk idiot that abuses children. Maybe
Yep.
that's enough to get you overthrown. And
Yep.
that's just a given for tyrants, though. Like in
Yeah.
order to be a tyrant, you must engage in these behaviors.
Yeah. Seems like that. So, okay, the final assessment is back to the six secret teachings. And he talks about how people are prepared for combat, whether it's revolutionary combat or something the ruler could draw on. And I found this one pretty interesting and revealing for today as well. He said, the implements for offense and defense are fully found in ordinary human activity. Uh, Digging sticks serve as caltrops, other things. Um, Oxen and horse-pulled wagons can be used in the encampment as covering shields. The different hoes can be used as spears and spear-tipped halberds. Raincoats of straw and large umbrellas serve as armor and protective shields. Large hoes, spades, axes, saws, mortars, and pestles are tools for attacking the wall. So he's saying people have the weapons they need. Now, this is a little bit dated, but you'll see why I'm bringing this in a second. The method that the men use for leveling fields is the same thing for attacking walls. So them working out in the fields gives them the skills they need to attack a city's walls. The skill needed in spring to cut down grass and thickets is the same as is needed for fighting against chariots and cavalry. The weeding method used in summer are the same used in battle against foot soldiers. So he's saying the people out there doing their farming, doing their physical activity, are building up strength and they're able to use that strength and translate it directly to the battlefield. I think you can see where I'm going with this.
Yeah, dude.
And so this is the way to enrich the state and strengthen the army. The tools for employing the army are completely found in ordinary human activity. Um, and yeah, so you make use of what you have and you take advantage of the strengths that people have. The problem is we're in a different time. And do we have just a plethora of people in our society who are out there doing those sorts of physical activities that would prepare them for being useful in warfare?
Well, Rob, that's a fantastic question, and I'm just going to answer it with this little statement. You know, I'm just going to go out on a limb here and say that it's a disturbing amount of people that get upset when their French fries are cold in the line of a drive-through restaurant. They can't emotionally deal with the fact that the product that they've received while being in an air-conditioned vehicle, waiting in line, handing somebody some illusory paper that is supposed to be currency for the product that is a French fry. If it's cold, they don't know how to deal with that. People are satiated, like we've been saying, with convenience, low attention spans. We don't know what to do anymore. We can't. We're like fish bowls, man. We're like fish swimming in fish bowls. We've got a 10-second attention span. We have no idea where we are, who we are, what we're doing, and we're just waiting for the next bell and whistle to bing off so that we can feel comforted. Nobody encourages fitness. Nobody encourages resilience. Nobody encourages being self-reliant. And it's all large, centralized institutions that are soaking up all of the resources. And on top of that, soaking up all of the information and means so that you have to rely on them. You have to, so that you can't even wipe your own butt without asking for help because you just don't know how to do it anymore. You don't, you need somebody to help you out with that. And that over dependency is exactly what we're discussing here. If you know how to do certain things, you can take those skills and those traits and apply them to maybe overthrowing a tyrannical government. And so if they can kind of offload all of those skills from the population that could be turned into means to overthrow them, the better. And then then we just end up like all the people in Wall-E where we're just floating in our thing, with IVs of Coke in our arms, and we have both kinds of Coke. Hey, pick your poison, whatever you want, whatever floats your boat. And that's eventually where we're all going to end up. Just cattle, just being sucked from whatever resource we can provide for the government. And currently it's income, right? But we're seeing now we're just biological, earners for them. So if they can get rid of the biological aspect and then replace it with autonomous robots that'll do everything for them, the more the better. And I think that people have been sold a lie in thinking that, once the robots come and take over all the jobs, the government's just going to provide us with income, and we can then we can do all of the underwater basket weaving we want. We can paint all the walls we want, and the government's just going to pay us because the robots are going to do everything, and everything's going to be kumbaya. No, no, it's going to be a game, and not to get too. And look, what it appears to be happening is it's a game of musical chairs. There's a finite level of options. There's a finite level of resources available. I don't buy into that. I think there's much more abundance than we give ourselves credit for. But what's essentially playing out is it's a game of musical chairs, and they want to pit people against each other for the illusion that there's a scarce level of resources, so that the people on top can remain in control. If the people are fighting and distracted for whatever reason, then we're all good. Then they're all good, right? I mean, if there's and I'll end this topic with this. If you want to, and this isn't a call for likes, I'm just saying, like likes are free, right? And so if certain channels grow, or if certain personalities grow, it's because of an accumulation of likes. But you see, it doesn't cost anybody to give those. Those are absolutely free. It's just at the discernment of whatever anybody feels is worthy of a like or not. But see, likes are in perfect abundance. There's no scarcity of them. There's nothing. It's just you can give as many as you want, as freely as you want to whoever you want. And if we can adopt that mindset to an extent of how to function in society, and not rely on centralized institutions to take control of everything and to put everything in their hands, all the better. So just to end on that note, and we've talked about this multiple times, is the best way to gain power back on an individual level is to become more self-sufficient, more self-reliant. And the best way to do that initially is to actually follow through with whatever it is that you're saying that you're going to do. If you say you're going to go to the gym today, go to the gym. If you say you're going to mow the lawn today, mow the lawn. If you say you're going to learn something, learn it. and not rely don't expect this information or these things just to happen because you want them to. It takes actual action to get a lot of these things done. And we forgot our tinfoil hats today, but I'll leave it on this note. There are institutions that are banking on you from not actually trying to do anything. They're banking on you being right at the point of being backed into a corner. They want you to see that there's an outlet so that you just don't do anything, so you remain stagnant and rely on them for all of your needs.
Right, right. So you're saying we're on fatal terrain,
Fatal terrain, quite.
and we're not going to survive without. Well, we're not going to. The assessment now is the Tau's gone, and we're not going to survive. So we can
I mean, we
curl
can.
up in a
It's hard. It's hard. It's going to
right,
be hard.
but basically our options are curl up in a ball or stand up and get the spirit back.
That's it.
And so then I think we wanted to talk about, what does that mean to get the spirit back? What does it mean to um, try to return the Tao to get that? And it comes, some of it is just, do the opposite of what we've been saying, that we shouldn't be doing, that we are doing. And then, but it comes back to this idea of virtue. Well, a lot of what we've been talking about is the rulers are uh, not doing their benevolent virtue stuff, but there's still stuff that's on our level too, of doing things that would, like you said, make you a more self-reliant person, a more capable person that would allow you to rely on yourself, but also to help others. And that's one thing that Aristotle said, right? He said, people will never rise up unless they trust each other. So you have to be the kind of person who is trustworthy and who is building trust between other people. And that, again, the only way to do that is to cultivate virtue, honesty, charity, love, forgiveness, reaching out to people, trying to help them, trying to teach them, coach them to the extent that you're able, and looking for those things from others to improve yourself, right? And let's see what other assessments we got here. Well, again, one of the things that he talks about in The Art of War, Sun Tzu, is that this necessity to when you see an opportunity, if you realize someone might be trying to trap you, you have to resist that opportunity, right? You want to use that against them. You want to extend them, so it's extend them profit, show them reward, and get them to come in where you want them. But then on the opposite side, you have to be controlled enough to see, there's something that looks like a victory, but is not going to be a victory. So that, that sounds a little convoluted, but it just really comes down to self-control, self-governance. You have to be able to see that donut and say, I recognize that that donut tastes good and that I want it, but maybe that's one too many donuts for today or this week or whatever it is, right? You need to be able to stick to your goals and your plans. So cultivation of virtue, it's kind of like back to the taxes thing. The taxes are simple, they're practical, and a lot of things in cultivating virtue are the same of doing the simple, practical things in your own life, getting yourself to be a ship, an ark, that's well built and seaworthy and can go through some storms and have some experience in that, right? And know what to do when the weather gets rough. And that I think is the foundation that you want to build off of, and then there's larger societal and interpersonal stuff off of that. But that's a pretty good way to start, is just developing your reliability in sort of every sense, your self-reliability, the skills that you have in your own follow through, but also, being that trustworthy person that other people can rely on.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. It's also, there's nothing wrong with healthy competition. There's nothing wrong with sportsmanship. There's nothing wrong with team against team, and pushing each other to strive for excellence. But there comes a time too when people need to share things a little more, right? Like if you have a specific trait or you have a skill, you pick something up that could benefit humanity, why not share that? Why, it's that ties in with communicating, with being able to be open and to share with others, to become self-reliant, to learn maybe a way to sever that attachment to a centralized institution. But instead of hoarding that information yourself, if you share that, you said, hey, look, I figured out, I don't need the government for this, or I figured out how to do this by myself. Let me show you. And so let's spread that. And
Mhm.
let's dissolve all of these illusions of separation that we have, that, like, you know, I think I've used this analogy before, but let's look at the fact that we're all fans of the NFL rather than individual players on a specific team that go up against one another. Sure, fine, do that on occasion, if you must, to better yourself, to test your mettle. Uh, but at the same time, I mean, we're all human. We're all in the bucket. We're all, so instead of kicking each other while we're both down, let's get up. And that takes a level of dissolvement uh of the I, of the ego, of me, just me being selfish, me needing to do all this for myself. Let's help others in this. um
Stephen, are you saying that we should love our neighbors as ourselves?
Something along those lines, Rob. I
No,
think
that's
might
profound.
yeah,
Where did you get that? How'd you come up with that?
I don't know. It was a gentleman, this gentleman that lived a little bit ago, a couple thousand years ago, I believe, and he had said something along these lines that struck a chord in me, struck a chord
Yeah.
in Bob, and I try to stick true to that.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well, I think that's an excellent place to kind of pause for this episode, and we will pick up on the next one. This is kind of a broad topic, and I know that there's gonna be a little bit of bleeding from this conversation into the next one. And that's perfectly fine. I think that these conversations need to be had, and I think that people need to really start to chew this up in their minds and see what we can do on an individual level to become more self-sustaining, self-sufficient, and then teach others how to do the same thing. And
Yeah.
so if you'd like to find Rob's content, you can go on in the link in the description down below. There will be a link to his Substack as well as to his YouTube channel. And as well down below, there is a link to the Sons of God Discord community, where if you're struggling with overcoming addictions, if you're struggling with finding accountability, or looking for like-minded men from all over the world. I mean, unbelievable. I'm having conversations with guys from Norway, from Africa, from South America, from Australia. It's absolutely incredible. So if you'd like to try that, please check out the link in the description down below. Other than that, ladies and gentlemen, Rob, do you
Can
have
I
anything
do it?
else?
Yeah, can I do a shout out?
Absolutely, absolutely.
I think a couple things would be helpful for people that they can do on their own. One is just reading Aristotle's Politics here that I've been talking about. If you think we're facing new problems, if you think this is a whole, this is just something that people aren't used to, and like this book's just going to blow that out of the water. This is just covers everything that is in modern discourse, and it reveals like people have known this for so long. So I think there's a lot of good stuff in there. Um, and then also there's another book called The Battle for the American Mind, and that's written by Pete Hegseth, who's the Secretary of Defense, I believe, someone in the cabinet, and uh, and co-authored with a more of a scholar, and that's about sort of this idea of what was the American spirit, how did it fall apart, and how do we get it back? They have a specific agenda and system that they're purporting there, but I think it's a good one, so that's something to look into as well.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Those are really good supplements to go along, of course, with Art of War. That politics one is one that I'm really looking into as well. Aristotle. And so let's keep going with this. Thank you very much. Rob, it was an excellent conversation. God bless, and may peace be with you.